it starts off with the orchestra, which is typical in a concerto. But what's unusual is that the orchestra will only play for 4 measures. After that, then the cello soloist will come in and play particularly 3 notes, really low in the range on the low C. And so the relationship between what the orchestra plays and what the cello plays is really quite interesting rhythmically. The orchestra will establish certain context, and then the cello will come in and its rhythmic, essentially, meaning will be perceived through that context. So what I want to do is I'm going to play the opening, or at least a piano version of the opening, pretend I'm an orchestra, and kind of give you two possible contexts, just like I did before with B major and C minor, providing 2 different contexts for this black note. So one context would be that we hear all of this music in its notated time signature of 4/4, or the common time. And so to feel it that way, what I'm going to do when I play is I'm going to have the motion of my body reflect the context of the music at that point. And so the motion of my body will reflect this common time. And so we're going to take a measure, which we can think of as just a unit span, and we're going to divide it into parts. And so here we're going to divide it into fourths or quarters, and then those will be further divided into eighths. So the opening music, quarter, 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 eighth, 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 eighth. There's this, this is very common to divide up your common time measure in this way. So what I'll do is then I'll play the next 2 measures. That was half of the 4 measures. So I'll play the next 2 measures, and we'll notice that something starts to change. You're going to get some of these hemiola effects I talked about earlier. But the question is, what is your context? In what meter do you experience the music? So what I'll do here is I'll play the music, and I will continue to think of it and to understand it all in 4/4. So continue the quarters and the eighths in my body. Here we go. So there's the cello coming in with my left hand by itself. So even though we had some hemiola effects, I continued to feel it in 4/4 with those 8th notes. And so when the cellist comes in that context, it makes sense to hear each of these notes as 3 of those eighths long. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. Because that's probably the best fit for the music that we're hearing. But Brahms writes an introduction that is easily modified. It's very malleable music, and so we can easily sort of tip its context to something else. So now what I'll do is that I will be a little more, I'll be less conservative in how I'm hearing this music, and I will then shift over to another beat that we hear about halfway through the introduction, and I'll use that as my context. So halfway through, my body will change how it's moving, and it will match something that's more local in the music. So something like this. All right, so in this context, I changed my beat. My body started moving to what my right hand was doing, which was creating this hemiola dissonance, or rather discordant relationship with my left hand and with the earlier 4/4. But these would be, I guess you could call them 1/6 notes, because in the entire measure, we hear 6 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 within the entire measure. So we hear these 1/6 notes playing against what we heard earlier in the 4/4, which is 1/4, 1/8, and then what my right hand is doing, which is still quarters. So then when the cello comes in that context, we hear these notes occupying 2 of these 1/6 durations. Well, 2 times 1/6 is 1/3. This is the way actually Brahms notates the music. It's possible to notate music to show a duration that is 1/3 the length of a measure. We call those triplets. But that's actually what Brahms notated. And it's a little different, but very close to the 3/8 that we noticed earlier. 3/8, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, is quite close numerically to 1/3. Very close. So much like this note in pitch could be heard as a D sharp or an E flat, depending on the context of the other pitches. Here we have then these durations for the cello's entrance that could be heard in one of two ways. They could be heard as 3/8 in the context of 4/4 and quarter notes and eighth notes. They could also be heard as 1/3 notes in the context of 1/6 and triplets and all of that. And so we have a situation where the cellist is coming in and we could actually understand its very durations in one of two different ways. And in the book chapter, I connect that then to the biographical idea behind the concerto, which was that we have this situation that can be understood in one of two very different ways.